Hey guys, excited to be sharing with you for this third chapter of Counterfeit Gods. God bless your house group. God bless your discussion time together. I love this chapter, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about it. I want to start with this verse from Colossians 3. It's Colossians 3, verse 3. You have died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. The reason that I want to start with that verse is that what it's saying is that you have nothing to lose that hasn't already been surrendered. God owns it all. Your life is God's. You are not your own. Nothing that you have is your own. You have nothing to lose that hasn't already been given, that hasn't already been surrendered. So again, from Colossians 3, you have died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. I know for me, this chapter is a ton of what I need to hear. I think about money. Well, I mostly think about people and how they interact with money, but part of my job as a financial planner is I think about money a lot. And so I was very convicted by this chapter. Something that I've observed many times in what I do and in outside of what I do too, just talking with people about budgeting. I talk about budgeting a lot with people. Is I've observed a huge way that money can have mastery over us is fear that we don't have enough, or fear that we don't know enough about money. There can be a lot to know, it feels like sometimes. Fear that we'll run out of it. And in talking with people about their finances and thinking about how I interact with my money and possessions, and in particular, talking with people about budgeting, I've noticed sometimes two different themes. One is, I've seen many people who are obsessed with their budget. They crave that feeling of control. This is the camp I fall into. And a weakness of mine. For these people, a nearly constant background worry is that I won't have enough. And that I can plan my way, I can budget my way, I can manage my money into the feeling of security. I can plan and budget my way into that feeling of security. And for me and for others who fall in this camp, it often distracts us from the Lord's free and generous provision in our lives. On the flip side, I've seen many people who are afraid to budget or to put a plan together. They're worried that if they do, they'll feel like they don't have enough, or that they can't spend however they want, whenever they want. They feel that the burden of having a plan for their spending means that they can't have all the fun they want, or get that high of buying whatever, or of having their little comforts. We know that we won't like what we see if we actually take a look into the money mirror and come face to face with what we've actually been spending and what that says about us. And both of those themes, they're both forms of greed in their own ways. Money is a gift, and it can be used so well. And there's something beautiful about being able to use it in a way that aligns with your God-given purpose in life. And there is something good too about being able to use it to enjoy good things that come from God, and are opportunities to commune with Him, because everything good is a chance to commune with God and know Him more, right? And while I think that we would all mentally agree that money cannot give you what's best in life, too many of us live in fear of our money. Again, that we won't have enough, or that we don't want a plan to tell us what to do. We don't want to feel limited. And let us pray, friends, that Christ will help us to truly see that the best things are given as gifts, freely. And they have nothing to do with money. First, what Jesus has given to us, and then from that, what we give to others around us. Those are the best things in life. One of the things Keller gets into in this chapter that I think is very poignant is that greed is more noticeable when you have a lot. But you don't have to have a lot to be greedy. You can be plenty greedy even if you have very little. A verse that really stands out to me from the chapter is Luke 12:15. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So in that passage, Keller explains that Jesus is saying that greed is not just a love of money, it's also an excessive anxiety about it. And for me, I think for many of us, Jesus' warning hits home. We can't allow our personal identity to be wrapped up in money or possessions or our little comforts, or in the lack thereof. We typically think of greed as having a lot of money. However, the person with few possessions, who is constantly anxious about those possessions, is just as guilty of greed as the rich man who's constantly seeking to gain more for himself. Keller says that idols, or that idolaters do three things for their idols. They love them, they trust them, and they obey them. And when it comes to loving, trusting, and obeying money as an idol, it's clear that that doesn't just mean that we love, trust, and obey the dollars themselves, but moreover, what money can do for us. It can buy us comfort and convenience, for example. Those are fine things, of course, yet if we find ourselves prioritizing comfort and convenience above the gospel and above godly discipline and above love for our neighbor, then we have the idolatry of money in us. It's just in a harder to recognize form. When we're more focused on what we can get that will make our lives better than on what we can give, not just when it comes to material possessions, but even more so with giving of our love and our concern and our time and our things like that, then we are struggling with that same underlying idolatry, those same deep idols that are underneath the idolatry of money. Remember that money is a surface idol. Money and other surface idols are superficial means by which we serve our deep idols, they can be things like power, approval, comfort, or control. And I know for me, my worst deep idols are approval and comfort. And in reading this chapter and praying through it, the Lord has been convicting me of how I have been using money as a surface idol to serve my deep idols of approval and comfort. And when it comes to deep idols, you can't just say that you need to de-emphasize money or whatever the surface idol is. Rather, we need to talk with the Lord about what deep idol or deep idols that we are serving beneath our surface idols, and seek a change at the heart level through our faith in the gospel. In other words, we need to replace not just the surface idol, which might be a fine thing, but the deep idol that we're serving with Christ himself. In this way, we can focus not just on what we can get and not just on what we can give, as good as that is, but we can focus too on what Christ has already accomplished and done for us. So I love this quote. I'm just going to read a direct quote from Keller here in this chapter. Nowhere is this slavery more evident than in the blindness of greedy people to their own materialism. Notice that in Luke 12, Jesus says, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." That is a remarkable statement. Think of another traditional sin that the Bible warns against, adultery. Jesus doesn't say, "Be careful you aren't committing adultery." He doesn't have to. When you're in bed with someone else's spouse, you know it. Halfway through, you don't say, "Oh, wait a minute, I think this is adultery." You know it is. Yet, even though it's clear that the world is filled with greed and materialism, almost no one thinks it is true of them. They are in denial. Great passage, very clear. By the way, you will recall that Jesus does say adultery isn't just sleeping with someone else's spouse, but even if you look at someone lustfully, you've already committed adultery with them in your heart. But Keller's point remains. Greed is hard to see in ourselves. Here's just one expression, right? We could do an entire year-long talk series on this topic, of course, but one specific area that he talks about I think is good is tithing. Sometimes we ask ourselves, and I have sad to say, sometimes said to myself, what is the least I can give while still honoring the Lord with my finances? And sometimes we ask that question of ourselves, what's the least I can do? And God will still be okay with it. I wanted to share this quote from C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. I'm sure you guys haven't heard any C.S. Lewis quotes before. He says, "I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditures on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc., is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do, but cannot do, because our charitable expenditure excludes them." Man, talk about convicting, right? Keller has an awesome follow-up to that. Did Jesus tithe his life and blood to save us, or did he give it all? Tithing is a minimum standard. Friends, I'm preaching myself here too, we really can trust that God already has been and will always be far more generous with us than we could ever be with him. Think of the story of Zacchaeus that Keller talks about in this chapter. All of our means, all of our possessions, everything we have, it's all God's. Not just what we give away. And specifically when it comes to our money, not just what we tithe and donate, but what we spend is his too, and how we spend it and why we spend it. What we're saving and how we're saving it and why we're saving it. It's all his. Every nook and cranny of our life is his. God owns it all. God owns it all. That is so freeing. Jesus is what truly satisfies us. It is Jesus that you seek when you dream of whatever else it is that you think can satisfy you. Remember these words from 2 Corinthians 8:9. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. All right, God bless your discussion.